Hello, I'm Bill Fox, and this program is about East Brunswick. One of the topics that's on almost everybody's lips these days has to do with planning and growth of our community. And I imagine that there are a number of people who are not aware that at this particular time we're going through a review of the comprehensive master plan of the township. This is required by state law to be done every few years, and what is happening right now in East Brunswick is that we are undertaking that review. With me tonight to talk about the master plan and the review process is Nelson Silver, who is the chairman of the East Brunswick Planning Board. Nelson, welcome. And Jay Lynch, who has been retained by the township as a planning consultant to assist in the review process. Good evening, Jay.
Thank you.
I think probably the first thing we ought to deal with is what is a master plan. And I'll ask Jay what that is, what it does, and why it's important.
All right, a master plan is a document that is prepared and adopted solely by the planning board. It's not a document that needs any action by the governing body, but it is a document that's prepared after a series of background studies. And the background studies look at land use, traffic, community facilities, the natural features of the township, and it goes into enough depth and looks at enough characteristics so that you can begin to draw conclusions about how land should be zoned, where roads should be built, where community facilities should be located. It then, after a series of public hearings and comments by the public, it gets adopted by the planning board and then serves as a basis for zoning, which of course is adopted by the township.
So the planning board adopts a plan, and by the way, this is the current master plan of the township, adopted in 1977, reviewed again in 1981 and 1982, and as you can see, it's a rather thick document. It also has been amended a number of times. There are amendments for economic health, for recreation and parks, and so on and so forth. But this is the base document that we're reviewing at this time. Now, it's one thing if you're starting with a clean sheet of paper, but obviously we're not. How do you work that into this whole process?
All right, one of the requirements, and we all operate under a law called the Municipal Land Use Law. It's a state law, and it indicates how planning is to be conducted by municipal planning boards as well as governing bodies. And in that state law, it indicates that where you have an adopted master plan, you have to relate all of your planning issues to that plan, and in your recommendations section, if you recommend any changes to the plan, you have to indicate why the changes are being recommended, so that you indeed are not starting with a clean piece of paper every time you do a master plan update. You are starting from an established zoning and planning history and then building on that.
How much flexibility is there in changing the basic plan?
There's a great deal of flexibility, but of course in certain neighborhoods the flexibility is more restricted because the development pattern is already established. So one of the things that you're looking at in the background studies is to try to determine which neighborhoods have established characteristics that you should pattern any additional development around, and which neighborhoods really are basically untouched or perhaps have the potential for making some changes in zoning or planning philosophy.
You've been through this a number of times in different communities.
Yes.
What are the kinds of things that come up in this process?
All right, one of the ways that I think the planning process is most effectively carried out is if there is sufficient background information on which to base all of your recommendations. Also, we like to see early public participation in the process. In this way, any of the issues that are of great concern either to a specific neighborhood or to the township as a whole are brought to the attention of the planning board early enough so that they can react and consider it in the planning process. In this update, what we're doing is we're going through a review of the land use pattern. That means that we're looking at all the areas of the township where development has already occurred. We're looking at outstanding planning board approvals, so that any developments that have already received an approval and are either in the process of being built or have the right to build. And then we're going from there to look at demographic trends. Since the last master plan was prepared, the 1980 census was published. And in the 1980 census, there's a great deal of information that we can use to determine those areas of the township where people are moving in or moving out, and what the age structures are and how the age structures are changing. It's helpful not only from a planning point of view, but it's helpful to school officials in trying to determine where their needs may have to be met, where their facilities may have to be developed. As we go through the process, we spend the first 3 or 4 or 5 months just looking at background information and becoming familiar with the characteristics of the township. And then following that, we get into plan recommendations. We're now about 2 months into the process. So we're about halfway through our background studies. I might point out that we're also doing a study of the zoning compatibility, which means we're looking at individual neighborhoods and trying to determine to what extent there may be any areas that are either in conformity or not in conformity with the zoning regulations that we have, so that we can make sure that the ultimate zoning ordinance is tailored properly to the areas where there is existing development.
Okay, I want to come back to this whole process a little bit, but I'd like now to talk some about the planning board. As you've indicated, planning board has an important role in all of this. But first, Nelson, I'd like to ask you a little bit about yourself. I know you're a citizen volunteer on our planning board, but you also are involved in planning in your real life.
To some extent. I'm the administrator of the Intergovernmental Review and Assistance Unit within the Division of Local Government Services of the State Department of Community Affairs.
That's a mouthful. What is that really?
It is a mouthful. Essentially what our operation does is to review applications for federal funds for conformity with existing plans and regulations, and transmit whatever comments and state recommendations are necessary to the federal funding agency before they act upon grants under any one of 500 different programs.
How long have you been on planning board?
I've been on the planning board for 12 years.
It's a long time. And you've been chairman for how long?
Chairman, I believe, for the last 8 years.
I'm sure there are a lot of people who've never been to a planning board meeting and really may not be familiar with what it does. In other states, planning boards have very different functions than they do in New Jersey. Tell us a little bit about what the planning board does and what its responsibilities are.
Most of the planning board's time is taken up in the review of what are referred to as subdivisions and site plans. Subdivisions deal with the division of a tract of land into more than one parcel, and is essentially for the construction of single-family residential units. Board is concerned about drainage, circulation. The companion piece to subdivision is site plan, which would be for any development that is commercial or industrial. And in those instances, the board would be concerned again with drainage, circulation, lighting, parking, landscaping. The other real concern is the master plan. The planning board is the shepherd of the plan, and attempts through the zoning ordinance, which it prepares to and recommends to the governing body for its implementation, since all the planning board can do with regard to zoning is recommend, see that the goals and objectives that are set forth in the master plan come into being in the bricks and mortar of development in the community.
You were on the planning board when the current master plan was initially adopted. What process did the town go through in arriving at that master plan?
There were a significant number of meetings with the public where the board welcomed the comments and input from the public. But if I recall correctly, it was essentially a citizen-generated or committee-generated plan, and the board retained a consultant to put it into the proper format. After a plan was put together, we'll call it a draft, there were a series of public hearings as required by law, and eventually the board adopted the plan, which was then again translated into zoning.
How many members on the planning board?
There are 9 members on the planning board. There's yourself, the township administrator, a member of the governing body, and the remaining members are what the law refers to as citizen members.
All right, in the process of reviewing our master plan currently, what sort of mechanism have we put in place?
The planning board has formed a subcommittee represented with representatives from a number of the various boards in the town that are concerned with development, and a number of citizen representatives. And
how many in total, approximately?
I think of close to a dozen. That committee will hold a number of meetings, all of which are open to the public, and at which public comment is welcome, because the board is just the vehicle, or the committee is just the vehicle for preparing the plan, but we really welcome citizen input.
Which the committee will recommend to the planning board for action.
Correct.
When does the committee meet?
Committee meets every 4th Tuesday, I believe.
4th Tuesday.
In the municipal building, a large conference room.
Now, you've already had as one public or one meeting where you invited people specifically for the purpose of coming to comment.
Yes.
What was the result of that?
I think basically there were concerns expressed about making sure that in the remaining land that we have in the township, that we give proper consideration to the protection of open space and environmentally sensitive areas. And I think that point was raised by several members of the public, certainly expressing concern about what they perceive to be a large number of multifamily developments. And I think that they want to make sure that we take a close look at the density of residential development and the remaining vacant lands, and that we don't overbuild. We want to make sure that all the roads can handle the densities that we're talking about, and that we continue to recognize the land lying west of the turnpike as land that indeed is unique in the township, and that has a rural character that should be retained over an extended period of time. I think that was one of the stronger prevailing sentiments expressed during the hearing.
And I know of no proposal to change that,
Yes.
but you're referring to the area of East Brunswick on the map here that is shown in green and yellow stripes. And I might also point out that we can't forget about the area that lies along Dunham's Corner Road in this area, which is of is zoned in a similarly low density zoning. Not quite as this is 1 acre zoning for the most part in this area, although there is some 2 acre, and almost all of this now requires 2 acres for for each residential unit. Nelson, what were your impressions from that first public session?
I think there was a considerable amount of concern about the environment, and as Jay said, the area west of the turnpike, I guess, which referred to as the Riva Avenue side. The board is well aware of that and has expressed amongst itself concern for that area as to whether or not 2 acres or larger, or it is 2 acres now, whether or not something larger might be necessary to preserve that area.
Well, and indeed the history is that the planning board initially recommended a 3 acre minimum to the township council when this zone was put into place, and because of outcries from large landowners out here and small landowners, the council directed the planning board to restudy it, and we compromised on 2 acre. but it's still developing at a fairly rapid rate. How do we take into account in what we do what's happening around us? We obviously look at East Brunswick on a map like this, and it appears as though it's isolated, but the fact is that we're right in the middle of what I've come to call the city of Middlesex County, which is an area of some 625,000 people with, according to the county planning staff on this same program last winter, the expectation that over the next 10 years there'll be approximately another 125,000 people move into the county, or that the county population will increase by that number over the next 10 years. How do we fit into that? It's my sense that we could stop all growth, or even go back and tear down everything that's ever been built in East Brunswick, and the traffic, which is of most concern to people, would continue to increase. How do we factor that in?
Well, maybe I can take a shot at it first. One of the requirements, if you will, of the planning process in New Jersey is that you don't plan in a vacuum. You have to look at everything that's going on, not only within the township, but in the surrounding municipalities, in the county, and now in the state, because the state has a master plan. We've looked at the adjoining zoning ordinances in all the towns that surround East Brunswick, and it's interesting to note that East Brunswick is adjoined by a great many different municipalities, so we have to deal with coordinating land use with, I think, 11 municipalities adjoining the township.
What does it mean to coordinate?
We have to look at areas that adjoin to see whether there are any potential planning or zoning conflicts. All that means is that if the way land is zoned in one community might conflict with development on the bordering area of the other community, there really ought to be some attempt to resolve what those land use conflicts could be. A typical example of a land use conflict would be industrial zoning across the street from residential zoning, or a shopping center across the street from homes. Unless there are efforts worked out to try to make sure that those transitions are accomplished in a proper manner, there could indeed be long-term conflicts. Certainly some areas where communities adjoin, there's very little opportunity for conflict because of perhaps a stream corridor or woodland might be in between, and those areas might have very little chance of getting disturbed over an extended period of time. But at the county level and at the state level, the county master plan was last adopted sometime in the late 70s, and they are now in the process of updating their plan. All we've been able to relate it to so far is what was adopted, 7 or 8 years ago. The state plan, by the same token, was last adopted in 1980, and since that time, a state planning commission was created, and the state planning commission is now in the process of preparing a new state development plan. We're obliged not only early in the process to see what's going on around the community and make sure that we fit in with it properly, but we're also obliged, as we come up with our recommendations later in the process, to relate everything we're recommending to what's going on around us. So we're very deeply involved in the regional process, and I agree with you that there are many things going on in the region which we can't correct locally. There are background traffic flows on the turnpike, on Route 18, that have little, if anything, to do in many instances with the amount of development going on in the township.
Nelson, the Master Plan Review Committee, which I think is its formal name, has been meeting now for a few weeks. What have you been doing?
Attempting to identify some of the issues we'd like Jay to address, and to review some of the growing volume of background data, again, which Jay's expressed as necessary in order to begin to draw some conclusions from as to where the town was, where it is, so that we can then define where we would like to see it go.
I imagine most people's attention is on the so-called town green area, which is right in the center of town. But it represents a little less than 5% of our total land area. What is the committee going to do, and what is Jay going to do with regard to the other areas of already developed residential, future industrial growth, commercial, retail in the town, and so on? What kinds of things are you going to do with that?
I think that's still in the embryonic stage. It's definitely areas that have to be addressed, because as the town continues to develop the residential land that's left, which from some of the statistics I've seen shows is very little, we're going to have to begin to look to areas for industrial and commercial development to support our rateable base, given the way we have to generate funds, or the council has to generate funds to provide the services to the citizens of the municipality. And I think that over the next decade is going to be a significant area of concern. On the opposite side is concern of the committee for the already existing neighborhoods, the older areas of the community that have been here for 20 or 30 years, to take a look at those and to see if some recommendations are necessary to develop policies or programs to maintain their viability so that they don't deteriorate.
Are you looking at current population, for example?
Yes.
And I know that you're just beginning that process, but do you have some numbers? Do you have a number, an estimate of current population?
Well, the estimates at the present are around 40,000 to 42,000. We're not taking the estimates as exact numbers, because we've had some experience in the past that the estimates that are published as the official state estimates very often do not take into consideration what's going on in the existing population. One of the examples is that between 1970 and 1980, the township population grew by roughly 3,500 people. But at the same time, they added about 2,400 housing units. And it seems like a strange combination of numbers when you think about each new housing unit is obviously going to bring in more than just a little over one person per unit. But there's so much background loss of population that's primarily related to the children who are leaving home and going away to college and not having them replaced by others coming back in, that you end up having each household in the township is getting smaller in size as opposed to increasing in size. So you've got this background population loss, and at the same time, you know, you're experiencing housing production, but it's not enough to offset. I mean, just barely enough to offset the background loss of population.
So if I can rephrase what you said, even though there are new units being built, the number of people occupying older units is going down.
That's right.
At the same time, and the net result is not what it would be if the population were not declining in the older homes.
That's right.
That's an interesting concept, and I think hard really to grasp, but you're absolutely correct.
It's hard to explain.
Yes. The Census Bureau numbers from 1970 to 1980 reflect exactly what you said, and I don't think we have any more accurate estimate of population than the U.S. Census. As you look at, as we go through this process, I want to talk some more about this non-residential area, because I think that, as Nelson says, it won't be too many years before the rateable base of the township will become an issue, because to the extent that that's stagnant and not growing, then if we are to maintain municipal services here, people have to pay higher taxes, and that's going to be a concern to everybody. What kinds of things do you anticipate doing in looking at those industrial and commercial areas?
All right, the first thing we do, and I think it's an important part of the process, because it not only helps me to understand the township better, but it helps in the decision-making process. We're doing a land use field survey right now.
Now, what is that?
All that means is we're going out and looking at every property in the township. I'm doing it myself so that I can understand the township better than if I had someone else go out and do it and tell me about it. But I'm looking at all the properties, and what I'm trying to do is determine not only how much of it has been developed, but what the nature of development is. It's much better when you get out and see something and see whether it's, whether there are hills involved or whether it's flat open land, and what the relationships are between residential and non-residential areas. So what we're doing with that information is we're not only establishing the character of each section of the township, but we're identifying any major undeveloped parcels of land. By mapping those undeveloped parcels and relating the environmental information to those vacant properties, we're able to see how much potential development or what areas you could consider for changes in zoning. When you get back to the non-residential base, which is what the subject of your question was, the way you begin to approach how you can expand or modify your non-residential base is to get an understanding of exactly what opportunities there are for providing additional development in areas that lend themselves to non-residential, commercial, or industrial type use. And there's quite a range of activities that's covered by the so-called rateable base of a community. It's not just a choice between heavy industry and retail commercial, which are the kinds of uses that I think most people think about. But you have extensive areas in the township which have office development, both of the business office and professional office type, and industry can consist not only of heavy industry but light industry and warehousing and other activities that are certainly would contribute to a rateable base. So we'll look at the areas that are shown in the last master plan as industrial areas, see how much of those areas are developed, and then look at any possible new areas or areas of potential expansion of those areas.
That will be, I think, a difficult task for the committee and for the planning board to find additional areas. Nelson, once the committee, well, let me ask you this question: we've invited public participation, but a lot of people have things to do on the last Tuesday of each month, and they may not be able to come to the meetings of the committee. Are there going to be additional hearings or additional reaching out to solicit people's comments?
I would hope that once we get a little further on in the process, that we will be able to hold meetings as we did during the last master plan preparation, maybe on a Saturday morning. That's about the only other time. I mean, we could pick a night, but it's probably any night is just as bad as Tuesday. But I recall we had a number of Saturday morning meetings which brought us a larger number of people, and we'll try that.
At the the last session you had, which was specifically to gather public input, do you anticipate doing more of that kind of thing?
I would hope to, and perhaps do it in another part of town, rather than having everyone come to a central point. Maybe we can pick some place on the Rive Avenue side.
Well, schools are
the
very
best
helpful
place
for that, or other public buildings. What sense do you get of how much flexibility we have in, for example, modifying the residential portion of the plan?
Yeah, the sense that I have is that most of the residential areas are well established, the densities are well established, and for a large part of the township there isn't a great deal of flexibility. The areas that lie outside the fully developed neighborhoods are the ones that we certainly have to look at very closely to see whether any remaining parcels are designed for densities that may be too high, or perhaps we could generate a little bit more open space with taking a different approach. And I can't forget to mention that we've got both the county plan and the state plan being modified, and with an obligation to look at how those plans relate to what we're doing. We have to make sure that, you know, we keep the lines of communication open with both the county and the state, so that if we have particular interests at the local level that we want to see reflected in those plans, that we let them know as early as possible.
If we assume that, which I think is a valid assumption, that the areas that are in rural preservation and very large lot zoning are going to remain that way, it's my sense that there really isn't a lot of residential land left for development.
That's what I'm finding.
I mean, my guess, and I haven't sat down with the numbers, I'll be interested in hearing what they are, but my guess is that about 90%, maybe at least close to 90% of all the homes that will ever be built in East Brunswick have already been built. There just isn't that much area available for sizable numbers of homes.
Well, I think that that's probably an accurate estimate. I'm going to be going over those figures with a, you know, with a magnifying glass, if you will, and trying to see not only, you know, what's been built, but what's been approved, and that really gives you a handle on how much flexibility you have. And my sense is that your number is pretty close.
You can see that in the applications for subdivision approval that are coming before the planning board. Most of the subdivisions are probably less than 20 units, whereas 5-10 years ago they were much larger. And I think the feeling is that a lot of these are lots that are not that easy, or were not that easy to develop, and they, you know, people just moved on to easier to develop parcels.
What do we do about those odd lots? Is that going to be the subject of study in the master plan review?
I would say it is. We have to look at every piece of property and make sure it's properly zoned. Even if some remaining vacant parcels are 5 acres or less, we still have to look at how they fit in and what the best way is at dealing with the zoning on each individual parcel, without getting involved, of course, in something that's referred to as spot zoning, which is singling out a parcel for special zoning treatment without any real rational basis for it.
And that reminds me something that I keep forgetting about, and that is that every piece of land, no matter what its current use, has to be zoned.
That's correct.
Whether it's a park or a public facility or a school or whatever, it has to be included in the zoning plan.
That's correct.
So you do, as I recall, there are on the order of 15 or 16,000 different properties, that is, marked by different lot lines and so on in East Brunswick. That's a lot of work that has to happen.
Now, we went through the tax assessment records as part of our background studies, and I would say that if it's 15 or 16,000, it seemed like it was 150 or 160,000 entries, because we went through them one by one. One of the purposes of that was to see how many properties that adjoin each other, how many individual tax lots that adjoin each other and show up on the tax maps are actually in common ownership, because that also gets factored into how you zone and how you plan.
That, as an aside, we just received from the state their estimate of the valuation of the property in East Brunswick, and for the first time, I believe, we have gone over, way over, a valuation of $2 billion as the aggregate value of the real estate in the community. And it was just, doesn't seem like very long ago when we passed $1 billion, but the property values have been escalating very rapidly. In fact, it's in the neighborhood of 2.2 billion, which is an amazing number to me. Now, the committee, Nelson, is not the planning board.
No, it's not.
And so once the committee, what is the committee going to do, and then how does that relate to what the planning board is going to do?
The committee will recommend to the planning board a draft land use plan. The planning board will then conduct a series of public hearings to, I assume, gain additional input and to put its stamp on the draft land use plan. When it's satisfied with the plan, it will hold, again, one or a number of public hearings, and if it's satisfied with the content of the plan, we'll formally adopt it and make it the master plan of the township for 1988.
And what happens if zoning changes are recommended? What does the planning board do then?
Well, you mean if the planning board generates zoning change or recommended zoning changes, process is twofold. The planning board will hold one or a series of public hearings on the proposed zoning change, and if the changes are adopted, we'll recommend them to the governing body for formal adoption, and the governing body will, after the appropriate public hearings, adopt them if they see fit, or recommend changes to the planning board, and the process goes on.
Mm-hmm. Jay, you mentioned earlier the notion of circulation being a part of this, and we're talking obviously about traffic. How is that going to be taken into account?
Well, we're working with some background studies that serve as a basis for the existing plan. There is a separate traffic study that's underway by Goodkind and O'Day. They are looking at the overall traffic circulation system within the township, and their study is going on at the same time our study is going on. So as we get a little bit further into our background analysis, we will be getting together with the traffic consultants and seeing to what extent they feel that certain roads are having problems that relate to zoning. If they feel that some of the remaining vacant parcels, and they're certainly going to have to know what those potential development levels are in order to do their work. We're going to have to sit down and coordinate our work to make sure that any road designs that they come up with effectively relate to the zoning decisions that are made or the planning decisions that are made.
Nelson, one of the things that seems to me it's important to see happen is that people become aware of the facts that underlie where we are. We just talked about a population of 42,000 or so, and I imagine if you ask most people, as I talk to people, the estimates are 50, 60, 70,000 people, and people are amazed when you say, well, no, based on the state's estimates, based on the census numbers and projecting from that, it looks like it's in the neighborhood of 42,000. And that's an important point, I think, as we look at the plan. If our population was 70,000, we might do something very differently than if it's 42. So how does the committee plan to provide that kind of background information for people to properly assess what's going on?
I don't know if we've really gone into it that far, but what I would imagine is you have programs such as this to inform people of what's happening. You've got the newspaper, sort of public information.
I think also, Nelson, each one of our background studies will be prepared as a written document, and the background study on population characteristics, which is the general subject that you're into, that we're publishing a book that will have probably 30 different statistical analyses in them related to migration, birth rates, death rates, the age characteristics of the population, trends in jobs, trends in housing production. These are all factors which become very important in trying to get an understanding of the community. So that will be published as a separate document. It'll be the subject of an intense meeting, or perhaps two, with the master plan committee to make sure everybody understands it. It's difficult information to communicate, as statistical information generally is, but I think it's important to get an understanding of it so that everyone can have a solid base to work from.
I would hope that there would be enough copies that there could be copies available in the library, especially if members of the public want to look at them.
Well, I know, I'm sure that there are people out there who are saying, look, you know, you went through all those studies in the last plan. There are lots of nice numbers. I've been to the library, I've read it, and look at the result. My roads are full of traffic. I've got to leave earlier to get to work. I don't like all those townhouses. And so, I mean, going through those studies isn't going to make that any different, is it? Why do you have to do that?
Well, you can't take housing units away. We have to start from where we are, and we have to realize also that the road system, and the major road system in particular, goes beyond the control of the township. That's one of the reasons why there's a coordinating effort between the county and the state that's now built into the planning process. We have to really pay attention collectively from the county on down and the township on up at what county road proposals there are, how they relate to what the carrying capacity is of these roads, and how our zoning decisions relate to the way a road like Route 18 can function. As you mentioned earlier in the program, Route 18 functions not only as a service road for retail, commercial, and office uses that are located in the township, but it's a major connecting road between New Brunswick and the Turnpike and the shore area. It's one of the few well-improved links between Monmouth County and the Turnpike in New Brunswick.
Let me play devil's advocate again. Look, I mean, I don't want any more development. I think our master plan ought to say no more.
Well, I can answer that one. As you mentioned also earlier, zoning ordinance has to allow for development on every property. The zoning ordinance has to reasonably relate to the character of the neighborhood that's being zoned. You can't unzone property and basically take away the use of private property, because there's a whole body of private property rights that we have to respect, at the same time that we respect the public welfare, which is related to the generally recognized right to be able to use a road that's not gridlocked. We have to do a blending of all of those rights and analyze all of those rights as part of the planning process. But if, for example, a conclusion is drawn that because traffic is very heavy on certain roads, that no more development should be allowed on those roads, that's not a right that you can't take away the development right on an individual piece of privately owned property. You still have to say that that property has to be able to be used for some purpose, some productive purpose.
The only old farm.
Well, they're actually getting to a point where I think the courts are starting to recognize that agriculture is a legitimate land use, and not just a land use that we're looking at as an interim use until development arrives. So there are many efforts around the state to try to preserve farmland. They're generally directed towards areas where there's enough farmland in adjoining ownership, so that you have a sizable enough area to be able to have farming as a legitimate industry.
What role do the Mount Laurel requirements play in what we're doing, aside from the fact that we have a settlement that can't be disturbed for a while. But if we were starting without that settlement, how does Mount Laurel affect what we can and can't do in our residential zoning?
You want to try that one?
Yeah, I'll try that one if you want. If you were starting from scratch, you would have an obligation to have a housing plan, which is another part of the master plan process. A housing plan adopted by August 1st of 1988. The housing plan and the land use plan are the two mandated plan elements. They have to be in place by August 1st of 88 in every community around the state. Otherwise, the zoning ordinance could be found to be defective. What you have to look at in the Mount Laurel context is how many housing units are required to be built to accommodate the needs of low and moderate income families. And it relates to how many jobs there are in the community and what the land area is of the community and what the aggregate income is of the community, that is, aggregating all the incomes of all the residents of the community.
Does that mean that a more wealthy community would have a greater responsibility than a poor community? Is that what they're
A
saying
wealthier
now?
community with the same number of people as a poor community would have a greater responsibility. But the irony of the formula is that a wealthy community that has very low density of population would have a much lower aggregate income than a high density blue-collar community. So I take issue with some of the aspects of the formula, but the formula is what it is, and communities that have a high population generally are accorded a higher obligation than communities that have a low population.
High population relative to land area
Yes.
and income.
Yes.
How does one make a determination about the type of housing? I know that I've heard people say, I don't want any more townhouses. I don't want any more condominiums. Can you stop that?
You can stop it to a point. You have to keep coming back to the statutory test, which is that you zone in full consideration of the character of the district. So when we examine undeveloped parcels, we have to look at the character of development in the neighborhood and see to what extent that may dictate zoning of remaining vacant land. If land is large enough and it has some reasonable natural boundaries or legitimate zoning boundaries, as we might recognize them, such as streets or streams, they could perhaps be properties that you could consider for reduction in density. If there are any areas left in the township, for example, that are zoned for multifamily that haven't been built, all of those properties will be looked at to see whether a reduction in density is appropriate.
So what you're saying is that, for example, in the so-called Riva Avenue area, where we've established a pattern of, for the most part, of homes on large lots, that would make the continuation of that more defensible.
Exactly. And the fact that the area is not serviced by sewers makes it more defensible. And the fact that you have an aquifer recharge occurring in that area makes it more defensible. There are a lot of related aspects. You've got many environmentally sensitive features in that section of the township that help to support the idea of large lot zoning.
So what you're saying is that you can't just say, this is what I want there. There's got to be some relationship between what you want and what exists.
That's right. If you had an area, for example, that was serviced by sewers, and you decided that you wanted agricultural preservation and 25-acre minimum lot size, that would be very difficult to defend because the sewer lines are already in the streets and the area is ready to be served. But that's one of the reasons you do background studies, is to find out what the characteristics of areas are and how strong a foundation you can develop for whatever zoning conclusions you want to draw.
So that, that also provides you with a basis for defense if someone challenges your zoning.
Exactly. You always have to assume that whenever you're writing a zoning ordinance or developing a master plan, that somebody is going to disagree with you and may disagree with you strongly enough to take it before court. And courts have certain things that they look at. There's a standard procedure involved in planning, and they want to make certain that you followed a normal procedure and that you haven't done anything in an arbitrary manner.
There was a recent case decided by the U.S. Supreme Court that I know got a lot of people's attention. I think it was a California situation where the U.S. Supreme Court said that the local government there had to compensate the landowner for taking their land because of some zoning decisions or land use decisions they made. Does that apply in New Jersey as well?
It certainly does. New Jersey has a provision that's been in the planning statutes for a long time that if you show land for public use, you have an opportunity to reserve that land for public use for a period up to a year, but you have to compensate the property owner for the time that their property has been in effect taken off the market, so that we don't have a problem with relating to that decision in New Jersey. The courts in New Jersey have universally found that you can't zone property into idleness, is the way they phrase it. You can't say that property can be taken and put into essentially a public use without compensation, and that simply follows through on what the Supreme Court decided recently in California.
Now, Nelson, does the planning board have to accept the recommendations of the committee?
No, it doesn't. If it wants it, I imagine it could go on and continue to study and revise those recommendations.
Do you think it's likely that they will accept those recommendations?
I would hope so.
Planning board has participated in the formation of the committee and made recommendations of who's on it.
Correct.
What's the timetable? When will the committee be making its recommendations to the planning board, and when will the planning board be acting after that?
I can give you my idea of what the timetable would be. And I would say that our background studies should be completed within the next 2 months. And while there will be an absorption process for the committee, the master plan committee, in just trying to understand what's in those documents, and we're going to be going through that at the work sessions, it will be shortly after that we're going to start discussing land use decisions and the specific zoning on specific pieces of property that seem to be in a position where we should discuss and try to resolve what our zoning flexibility is. So I would say that probably by the month of December, we're going to start discussing zoning issues and land use planning issues. But I would expect that if it follows the pattern that it follows in most communities, we will be discussing alternatives and what the implications are of any zone changes, probably for several months after that. And then prior to actually referring a recommendation over to the planning board, we'll have to see how the land use recommendations relate to other aspects of the planning process, such as traffic and community facilities and other aspects of the program.
Is there a statutory deadline that we're working against?
There's a deadline that we should be looking at, which is August 1st of '88. We've got a contractual deadline that falls much earlier than that, so we'll be looking to probably have hearings, I would expect, sometime in the early spring.
For people who want to be involved or want to see this process going on, Nelson, why don't you tell us again when and for the most part where the committee meets?
Fourth Tuesday of every month in the municipal building in the large conference room at 8 p.m.
At 8 p.m. And the public is, of course, welcome to all of those meetings?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Well, thank you both very much
Thank you, Mayor.
for being with me this evening. Perhaps when we get towards the end of the process, maybe we'll do this again and look some at the specifics of what the committee is recommending and what might be happening to zoning in East Brunswick. So thank you again very much for joining me.
for
Thank
having
you.
me.